In the meantime, Republicans are offering to support a short-term increase in the debt limit. If a deal can be reached, it will be temporarily push off the chance of a U.S. default. The idea of that was starting to rattle the markets. Joining us right now is Republican Senator Rob Portman. And Senator, great to see you today.
Good to see you, Becky.
So the idea of defaulting on our debt is one that has caused a lot of concern, not just from places like the Treasury Secretary, the Defense Secretary, but business people, especially those who know how the markets work and who are intimately involved in those things, like Jamie Dimon saying yesterday that this would be pretty catastrophic and stupid to even get this close to it. What are your thoughts on the default, this deal that's been out there and that's been offered, and whether we should even be messing around this close to the deadline of October 18th?
Well, we have never defaulted, and we shouldn't default, and we won't default. The question is, how do you do it? And the extension of the debt limit has always been an opportunity to talk about the underlying problem, which is that we're spending too much, a lot more than we're taking in. And it's resulted in, frankly, some reforms. Remember, sequester, even before that, Graham-Rudman, more recently, the caps that were put in place on spending. So it's designed to be an opportunity to look at the underlying problem. And what Republicans are saying is very simple. Of course, we're going to extend the debt limit, but we got to be sure that we know, how this happened. And it happened almost entirely, the increase in the debt limit that needs to be made, other than what would normally, have to be done, for two reasons. One is the roughly $2 trillion reconciliation bill, meaning totally partisan, no Republican support, big spending bill that happened in March of this year. And then second is, the anticipation the Democrats have that they want to do it again. And this time, something between 3.5 and probably $6 trillion if you look at the real numbers as to what its impact is going to be on the debt. So Republicans have said very simply over the last 24 hours, we're not going to get in your way, but you've got to extend your debt limit because the increase in that debt limit is being caused by these, again, partisan reconciliation packages. Republicans, don't want to increase the spending in these areas. So I think it is an appropriate debate to have.
Here's the question. Look, you could say you're not going to get in the way, but by filibustering when they bring it to the floor, that would be getting in the way. But I think what's really happening here is you're right. This was always there, and it's existed through history as a time to talk about and have both sides come together. It doesn't seem to me that there is much conversation taking place between the two sides or any chance of that happening. Bernie Sanders wants to just get rid of the filibuster and say, if you guys are going to take the nuclear step of allowing us to potentially go into a debt default, we'll take the even bigger nuclear step of saying, forget it, let's get rid of the filibuster and change the entire structure of the Senate. I mean, this is a byproduct of there being no conversations between the two sides and no real room for any sort of compromise.
Well, you're right. You're absolutely right. Yesterday, there was a threat, and I think it was real, that Democrats were going to, in effect, blow up the filibuster and therefore, again, have, as you say, really no debt limit because they don't want to have the conversation. And you're right, we don't communicate as much between the parties as we should, but I don't think that's the fundamental problem. The fundamental problem is just a difference in philosophy as to how much we should be spending as a nation. We're now approaching $30 trillion in our debt. Again, if you look at this most recent reconciliation package the Democrats are talking about pushing, it not only increases spending a lot, but it also increases taxes to the point that it really would hurt our economy at a time when we're trying to, sort of get out of this pandemic and get back on track. So that's the difference. It's a philosophical difference as to taxes and spending.
At this point, it's still a problem for the Democrats because they can't get their entire party to sign off. You've got two senators who are holding out from the Democratic side. I think that was part of the problem, too. I think Joe Manchin looked at this and said, OK, if we're talking about a debt default, then that would be the thing that would push him to say end the filibuster. Where does this come back down? Is this really about two people kind of deciding between the two parties or between that party and deciding what's going to happen?
Well, I think the answer to this is pretty clear, that Democrats have the ability to provide the votes to be able to get this done. They have a mechanism to do it. In effect, Becky, if you think about it, there already is a carve-out for the filibuster for debt limit. It's called reconciliation. You can do it under reconciliation because reconciliation deals with a budget, either taxes or spending. So the debt limit can be done under reconciliation. Republicans have basically said, we're not going to get in the way. We're going to waive a lot of our rights to, the times that we would normally have to debate issues or notices to take it to the budget committee. So go ahead and do it. We're giving you the ability to be able to do it. You can do it with 50 votes. You can do it under reconciliation. It's an existing carve-out in effect, not just for the debt limit, but also for other economic issues. And the question I have is, why don't they just do it?
Hey, Rob, so they're going to have that chance again in December, and now they've got more time. They said they didn't have time to do the reconciliation, so now they have more time. But they're saying they're definitely not. And Sanders says absolutely not going to happen that way. So when December comes around, McConnell's probably still not going to do it without a filibuster. He's going to still filibuster. And the Democrats say they're not going to do it using reconciliation. Do you think these various elections we have in November that could indicate the mood of the country, do you think that's going to advantage one side versus the other? Do you think that's how this gets rectified? Otherwise, we're going to have the same arguments we're having right now in December.
Well, that's why, of course, the idea was to extend it to December of 2022 beyond that election, and that probably would make sense, Joe. But let me mention two things. One, and you know this, when you ask Democrats why they don't want to use reconciliation, it'll probably come down to one issue. They don't want to assign a number to the debt limit increase. Under reconciliation, you have to say how many trillions of dollars you're going to increase the debt limit. And by the way, just under normal circumstances, without an additional, $3 to $5, $6 trillion, it would be $1.4 trillion between now and December of 2022. So they don't want to assign a number to it. But that's what the American people deserve. They need transparency. That's what the debt limit is all about, is to let the American people know, okay, Congress once again is extending the debt limit, increasing everybody's taxes to service that debt, putting future generations at risk with more and more debt. So let's put a number to it. So I don't think that's a legitimate excuse. So my hope is that what we have here is an opportunity for us Republicans not to get in the way of the procedural issues that are involved in reconciliation, because it does take some time. We'll be willing to waive those. Everybody, as I understand it, agrees to that. But let's assign a number to it. Let the American people know what's happening here.
Is it 2022 or does this December, Rob?
Well, the latest proposal that was floated was only for this December. You're correct, but you remember the previous proposels, incling by the Democrats, was to take it out to December 2022 beyond the election.
So,
he's talking about the money.
Yeah, but this one, if it's December of 2021, do you think that something will change this November that advantages one or the other side by December, so that we don't have this talk again?
Well, I think the notion there is, Joe, that by that time we'll know what's happening with regard to reconciliation one way or the other. So we'll be able to, know what the debt limit increase ought to be. But I think even at that point, the American people should have the transparency to know what the number is. What are we increasing it to? Not just doing what's called a suspension of the debt limit, which is just to say, here's a date, we're just going to, keep spending without taking into account what the debt is. So I don't think anybody wants to go over the precipice. I really don't. I don't think there'll be a default. There hasn't been, there won't be. But I do think this is an opportunity to have this debate and discussion. And in terms of its impact on the 2022 election, Joe, your other question, absolutely this is going to impact the election. But I don't think the American people necessarily are following the day-to-day like you all are, or I am, with regard to what's going on with the debt limit. But they do get it, that we are spending our way into a financial crisis, and that there's a fundamental philosophical difference here in terms of the taxes, because what Democrats are saying is they want to spend a lot more, and they also want to tax the whole lot more. Now, their taxes actually don't add up to the spending, so there actually will be debt on top of that. But the spending is something that I think people are attuned to, but I think the taxes are really problematic for people. When you look at the analysis from the Joint Committee on Taxation, this does fall on middle-class Americans. There's no question about it. And, so that analysis is out there for people to see. If you make less than $400,000 a year and you're being told by President Biden you're not going to be touched by this reconciliation bill, the tax bill, it's just not true. And again, go to the Joint Committee on Taxation, nonpartisan group up here in Congress who has now analyzed their legislation and said this is going to fall on you, too.
Senator Portman, thank you. We will hope for the best, and we'll check in with you again soon.
Thanks, Becky.